helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, Canadian certified counselor and award-winning psychotherapist.
Welcome to another episode of the Life Transformation Show, your weekly guide to better mental health and relationship harmony. We are on the air every Monday morning at 9:30. I'm your co-host, Denise Hart, and I will be asking you some questions. Are you struggling in your role as a parent? Do you often regret impulsive parenting decisions in which you come down too heavily on your children? Do you often feel that you fail to impose proper boundaries with your children? Does it often feel like total chaos in your household? Chances are you're living in a haunted house. Haunted not by ghosts, but by your past childhood experiences. Today's show is for you. The topic is Haunted by the Past, Parenting Challenges from Childhood Adversities. In today's show, Michael will be highlighting specific challenges, explain the causes, and look at how to overcome these challenges using biblical examples and counseling strategies he used to help his clients. If you have any questions or would like to connect with our counseling services, don't hesitate to reach out to Elim Counseling Services at 613-699-1677 or visit our website at elimcounselingministry.com. So let's get right into today's show with psychotherapist Michael Hart. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. We just want to clarify right off the bat that we're not going to be talking about anything spooky. This is not a Halloween edition. We're going to be talking about haunted by the past, things from your childhood that might be affecting your ability to parent effectively. And so we're going to be looking at specific things, as Denise said, and also strategies for overcoming these challenges.
Yes, Michael, this topic is parenting is one of the hardest job anyone can do.
Yeah, wish children would come with a manual, right? And so this is your next best thing to a manual.
For sure. So why don't you start by telling us why you believe that a person's childhood affects their parenting?
Well, Proverbs 22 verse 6 tells us that we should train up a child in the way that they should go, and that when they're old, they will not depart from it. And so training doesn't mean what we teach the child by sitting the child down and telling them about life. It also involves how we live in front of that child. And so when a child grows up in a household where they're experiencing certain negative adversities from their parent, or they're seeing certain patterns of parenting, they're learning from their parents how they should act as parents later on in life. So childhood adversities can also significantly shape a child's approach to parenting. When parents have experienced trauma or hardship in their own childhood, it can manifest in various ways as they raise their children.
So parenting is a hard job. And now you're telling us that all our experiences will affect how we parent. So what is one of the primary effects that childhood adversity can have on one's parenting?
One of the primary effect it can result in is overprotectiveness. So when parents suffer trauma during their childhood, whether it's be sexual abuse or physical abuse, or they had parents who are overprotective, they can in turn become overly protective as well. And there's a term for it where people will call these parents helicopter parents, like they're hovering over their children and trying to bubble wrap their children from suffering any kind of hardship or injury. And so this kind of overprotectiveness is often rooted in childhood adversities.
So are these the only reasons? What about children who have been bullied? Couldn't they also become overprotective?
Yes, that's a good point, because if a child is bullied, they're learning not just from their parent, but they're learning that the world is an unsafe place. And if they haven't gotten help to overcome the trauma of being bullied, they can be overprotective of their children and try to shield their children from being bullied, even in cases where it's not warranted.
So talk about the impact of overprotectiveness.
So if a child is overly protected by their parents, this can affect the child's ability to develop independence and to learn to function in the world on their own. And so they may become overly dependent on the parent. It may also affect their social skills, because they might not have opportunities to bond with their peers because they are sheltered and protected from every possible thing that could go wrong. But what the studies also show, that if a parent is overly protective, it could also result in the child developing anxiety about interacting with the outside world. And so they may become withdrawn. They may develop agoraphobia as a result of the parent's anxiety and not be inclined to venture out in the world and thrive on their own. So overprotectiveness can have very adverse effects on a child's development.
I'm sure no parent want their child to develop all these things you just spoke about, Michael. You often use biblical examples to illustrate your points. Is there an example that comes to mind?
My mind goes to the father-son relationship between Jacob and his youngest son, Benjamin, found in Genesis chapter 42 and 43. Jacob, believing that his son Joseph was devoured by a wild animal, became very protective of Benjamin. And so when a famine strikes Jacob's older sons are sent to Egypt to buy grain. But Benjamin was not allowed to go because Jacob was afraid that he would lose Benjamin as well. And so Benjamin is being robbed of this opportunity to travel with his older brothers, to see life in a foreign country, to have the adventure of going on this trip, and to become responsible because Jacob was overly protective. So the cause of Jacob's overprotectiveness was as a result of a trauma, the trauma of believing that he had lost one of his son, Joseph. And so because he thought Joseph was dead, he now became overly protective of Benjamin, robbing him of rich opportunities that he could have to develop. So this must have placed a burden on Benjamin, who is not allowed the same freedom as his brother. So the impact on that, on Benjamin's life, could have been limiting his independence. And so we find that parents who are overly protective, that they're limiting the independence of their children by being overly protective. But it could also result in an emotional strain. So children may feel burdened by their parents' excessive control and fear. And they may feel as if they are being robbed of opportunities to interact with others because of the parents' overprotectiveness. And this can also lead to conflict and rebellion by the child, because some children who feel as if they're protected by a parent, when they become of teenage years, they often rebel and go to extreme means that they would not have had they been given and allowed certain freedom.
What I'm hearing you say is that overprotectiveness can have serious consequences. So what are some of the things parents can do if they realize that they are being overprotective?
Well, I think it starts with what we said earlier on, by realizing the negative consequences that it's having on your children. Realize that you may think that you're helping the child, but you're actually creating psychological harm to the child by being overly protective. And so realizing the consequences is the first step. I think the second thing that you should do as a parent is to try to see where it's coming from. If you tend to worry a lot about your child's safety, it could be that you have experienced lost some sort of loss or death in your childhood. Maybe a loved one died. And so you live with this fear that your child could die as well. And so you are protected, very protective of the child. And so realize where it's coming from. Have you lost a loved one? Are you suffering the consequences of being bullied? Did you have an abusive parent? And so what I often see in my practice is parents who are in conflict over how they parent, because one parent may feel that it's okay to discipline, and the other parent who is overprotective might not want even a harsh word to be used to their children. And so they're reacting out of the past. They're reacting out of their childhood wounds, and they're creating conflict with the other parent who are just trying to instill discipline in the household. So if you find yourself that you're in conflict with your spouse because every time that he speaks or changes his tone or raises his voice at the child, you're offended, and it's as if you feel as if you have to jump in to protect that child, it's quite possible that you are operating out of a past trauma, a past hurt, and it's haunting your relationship and affecting your ability to parent effectively. So realize where it's coming from. And then the third thing that I would suggest is that you get professional help to deal with the root cause of whatever it is that is making you overly protective.
Those are great points, Michael. I'm hoping that listeners would adhere to some of those so that they can foster a healthier family dynamic. So what would be your second point in this challenge?
Yes, another challenge as that happens as a result of childhood adversity is favoritism, where you have a parent who chooses a child as a favorite. And you might not see this as a big negative, but favoritism has very dire consequences on the family system. We see this in the story of Esau and Jacob, how the parents playing favorite destroyed the fabric of the family and led to it being ripped apart, and divisions that were never fully healed. And so favoritism is often the result of unfavorable conditions that a parent suffered in childhood. A parent who faced neglect, emotional or physical abuse, or who had their own experience of being favored or disfavored, may inadvertently replicate these dynamics with their children. And so their unresolved trauma and unmet emotional needs can lead them to try to seek validation from a child, or to protect the conflict, the internal unresolved conflict that they're feeling. They may turn to a child to meet those needs subconsciously. And so if you are in a parenting role where you find yourself favoring one child, and maybe you don't see yourself as doing that, but you have been told by your spouse or even your other children are pointing out to you that you seem to be favoring one child over the other, it's important for you to stop and consider that if you are doing this, it has very dire consequences on the family.
Yes, Michael. So I'm thinking that most parents are not doing this really consciously.
Absolutely. A lot of times it's been done out of an emotional wound, and they're not really fully conscious of what it is that they're doing.
So what would be the impact of this favoritism as a parent?
So I referred to the story of Esau and Jacob. That's a biblical story, but favoritism in today's context can have profound, long-lasting effects on both the favored and the disfavored child in modern families. So the child who is disfavored can grow up with a lot of resentment and bitterness towards the favorite child. And they may also end up being bitter at the parent as well for not treating them as equal. But also the favorite child has been put as at a disadvantage as well.
Michael will be right back. You have been listening to the Life Transformation Show, where award-winning psychotherapist Michael Hart of Elim Counseling Services has been speaking on the topic, Haunted by the Past, Parenting Challenges from Childhood Adversities, Part 1. You can find out more about us at elimcounselingministry.com or by calling 613-699-1677 or 1-877-204-2914, where you can also make a donation to this Christ-centered ministry. Your donations help us to stay on the air and to provide subsidized counseling to those who can't afford it. Back to Michael.
We see that in the story of Esau and Jacob, Jacob was not able to stand up to his mother Rebekah because he was spoiled and favored by her, so that even when this deception was taking place, he was about 40 years old when the scheme to deceive his father was devised by his mother. And he did not have the self-autonomy to say, this is a sin against God. I cannot go through with this. Why? Because he has been favored for so long and pampered for so long by his mother that he could not have the moral authority to stand up to her and to say, I cannot do this. This is not right to deceive my father. So children who are the favorite child also develop issues with entitlement, or they may have unrealistic pressures to meet the parental expectation or the needs of the parent. And so conversely, the disfavored child might struggle with feelings of inadequacy, low self-esteem, and as I said before, resentment towards both the favored sibling and the parent as well. And this dynamic can strain siblings' relationship and create a very toxic family environment.
You're right, Michael. I find this biblical example intriguing, and it shows that favoritism can have negative impact on any family. And so let's talk about the effect when one or more parents show favoritism.
So in the biblical narrative, we have Isaac favoring Esau, while Rebekah favored Jacob. And this division of loyalties meant that the couple was not united in their approach to parenting. And so their different preferences created a rift between them as they each aligned themselves with a different child. And this led to conflicting priorities in the couple's relationship. They weren't going after the same goal. They did not have the same vision for the family. And so there is this division of loyalty. But then we also see that there is secrecy, because we find that Rebekah is conspiring with Jacob to deceive Isaac for the blessing. And this is a clear indication that there is a lack of trust and communication between the couple. So rather than discussing her concerns with Isaac, Rebekah took matters in her own hands and acting in a secret and undermining way to undermine Isaac's authority. So we see also that there was this conflict and disharmony brewing in the story. So the favoritism and the resultant deception fostered distrust between Isaac and Rebekah. So Isaac's realization that he had been deceived by his wife and his younger son would have created for him significant emotional pain and could have led to a breakdown in their relationship. So all of that is take place in parenting roles today, where one or both parents show favoritism. There is a division of loyalty, there is conflict and disharmony, and there is emotional distance that is created between the couple.
So the Bible is definitely telling us in this story something that we're not to do. We're not to be like these parents.
Absolutely. We are not to show favoritism because it has severe consequences on the family system.
So let's go right to the psychological literature. Has there been any study done on this?
Yeah, so there's an interesting study that was done in 2013 and that was published in the Journal of Marriage and Family that backs up this story in the Bible. And it's titled The Lasting Impact of Parental Favoritism and Disfavoritism in Later Life, an analysis of sibling relationships. And so what this found is that children who perceive themselves as favored or disfavored by their parents, that they reported lower levels of family cohesion and higher levels of depressive symptoms in adult life. So these findings show that there is emotional and the psychological impact of favoritism in a family.
Very interesting study. And it concurs with what the Bible says. So what are some of the things parents can do if they realize that they are showing favoritism?
I think that's a very good question, Denise, because when it comes to favoritism, parents tend to see it as being harmless. You know, you're just showing love to one of the children. But from what we have said here, I think the first thing that a parent should do is realize that favoritism is not harmless and that it has severe consequences on the family system. The story that we have used, the biblical story that we have used, underscore the dangers of favoritism. And now you might say, well, that's not happening in my household. No one is trying to kill anyone. But often there is a resentment that is brewing. And so become aware that when you're showing favoritism, you're affecting not just the child that you're also adversely affecting the child you're showing favoritism to, as well as the other child. And I would say get help to undo the patterns that you have learned. Attend parenting courses where you can learn how to parent equitably and avoid significant harm to your family.
Great points, Michael. What is another effect of childhood adversities on parents?
Another effect is emotional reactivity. Parents who grew up in volatile or emotionally unstable households may have this propensity to have emotional responses. So this learned behavior is often a coping mechanism from their own childhood experiences, where reacting strongly to stress or conflict was a survival strategy. Or they may have witnessed or been subject to intense emotional outbursts, leading them to mirror these responses as adults. So in other words, they are repeating the template of parenting that they saw, where their parents would often react in volatile way. And so this emotional reactivity is often rooted in unresolved trauma, anxiety, or fear from their formative years.
So talk about the impact of that, Michael.
So it has tremendous impact on the home environment. So there is an unpredictable home environment. You never are able to tell when something is going to trigger an emotional outburst. And people in that environment, they walk on eggshell around the emotionally explosive parents. And so children in such environment may constantly feel on edge, never knowing what might trigger an emotional outburst from their parents. They live in this state of anxiety that can have severe long-term consequences on their health. So children coming out of these homes often develop stomach issues because of prolonged anxiety. They may have irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease as a result of the stress affecting their digestive system. But then there is also long-term psychological effects. So the instability and fear can lead to long-term psychological effects such as anxiety, depression, and difficulty in forming healthy relationship, because children who grew up in this volatile home life may not see relationship or a romantic relationship and starting a family as something that they would like, that's something that they should aim for, because of the stress that they associate with the family life.
Those sounds like severe consequences, Michael. So if a parent finds themselves in this state, what advice would you have for them?
I think, first of all, realize the consequences that it's having on your children's health, on your health, on the dynamic in the household. And realize, too, that you're setting a pattern that is likely to continue for a generation, and make an effort to break that generational curse so that it doesn't continue to the next generation.
So, Michael, I'm sorry to cut in, but we are quickly out of time, and I know you have a lot more to say. So next week, we'll continue with the strategies in your show for part 2. Thank you for joining us today as we explored Haunted by the Past, Parenting Challenges from Childhood Adversities, Part 1. If you missed any part of today's show or want to revisit it, you can find this and past episodes on Elim Counseling Services YouTube channel. Please consider making a donation to help our Christ-centered ministry. Your contribution will directly help those seeking support and guidance. Until next time, this is your co-host, Denise Hart.
And Michael Hart, praying together that God would bless you in all your relationships and keep you sound in mind and pure in heart.